right, Cover One, the Draft Podcast. Welcome to a Sunday night edition of the Draft Podcast here, and it's Scenario Sunday. We did it last week, and we're really just kind of spitballing ideas with myself here, riding solo on these shows. And last week, we talked briefly for about 15 minutes on Trevor Lawrence and the New York Jets, and really where's the ideal landing spot for Trevor Lawrence, and really what the New York Jets should do, being that they'll probably have the first pick the way it looks right now. I don't think they beat New England on Monday Night Football and all that stuff. So you guys can check that out over on Apple Podcasts, on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, you can find it. Just search Cover One Draft Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. So today, a little bit different. Been thinking about it all week, and I'm going to go with a team that I think they're gelling right now. They're actually playing really good defensive football, which is a little surprising, but I thought from earlier in the year they were one of the worst teams that I think that I had saw earlier in the season, and that was the New York Giants. I thought they were one of the worst teams in the league, and they've played actually pretty good these last couple of weeks, and when you look at where they're at compared to what they were doing a few weeks ago, I mean, they've put together 2 wins in the last 4 weeks. Both of those wins, though, were against Washington. They barely lost to the Philadelphia Eagles. They barely lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'm going to be honest, I think that this falls on one guy. It's not on the defense. It's not on Joe Judge. I think it's on the quarterback, and I think it's on Daniel Jones. Now, realistically, I don't think that the New York Giants are going to get rid of Daniel Jones, and I don't think that they're going to draft a quarterback, so why are we even having this conversation? But I think I need to kind of voice my opinion on it and let it be known that I think the New York Giants should move on from Daniel Jones. I think there's enough body of work here to see that really he's just not the guy. And you can go look at the statistics, that's fine. You can go watch the tape, that's fine. And I think there's been some impressive throws by him. I think he's got some pretty good composure overall as far as being a professional and just holding it together out there on the field. He's athletic for a player of his size at 6'5", 221. But when you watch him play, he just does not look like the guy. And you can use not today's game, the win against Washington, but you could use the games prior, Philadelphia and Tampa Bay. There was opportunities for the Giants to win those games. The defense did their job. I mean, Tampa Bay, sure, 25 points. That's a lot of points, but you scored 23. You had an opportunity to tie this thing up with a 2-point conversion. He has a wide-open Deion Lewis to the flats in the end zone, and he hesitates, he waits, and he gives Antoine Winfield one of the best roaming safeties we've seen come out of the draft in a couple of years. And he comes in and he makes a great play, but the progressions were super slow from Daniel Jones. And then you look at Philadelphia, he has an opportunity. I mean, the ball is in his hands late in the games, and there's just a lot of times that he turns the ball over or he just goes way too quickly through his progressions, and he struggles, and it shows. And it's just one of those things where I think when you watch that, you have to say, this guy is not it. And you can look at it statistically. If you're one of those people, you don't want to trust the tape and all of that, you want to look at it statistically, by all means, go ahead. Sure. He just got his 5th win. He's 5-17 in the games that he's played. That's 22 games for him over the last 2 years. Is it small sample size? Sure, it's a season and a half essentially. But and he's only 23, and I get that. And he's played a lot of games with some inconsistent weapons, from losing Saquon Barkley early this year to not having Evan Ingram for a while, for not having Sterling Shepard, to having some ups and downs with Darius Slayton and Golden Tate, the money that he's making and not necessarily being the same guy. I get all of it. You can make all the excuses that you want, but 31 touchdowns to 21 interceptions, 23 fumbles, and 15 fumbles lost. Today was his first game without an interception since the Dallas game in Week 5. But let me say those numbers again. 31 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, 23 fumbles, 15 of those fumbles are lost. The guy turns the football over more than once a game. More than once a game. There's 22 games there. There's 21 interceptions, 23 fumbles. That's 44 turnovers. That's 44 lost balls. They recovered 8 of them. Great. So 21-15. That's 36 turnovers in a 22-game span for a guy that has all this promise, but when you're turning the football over, eventually you have to start pointing the finger at somebody. And while he's undefeated against the Washington football team, that goes to show just how much of a mess the Washington football team is. And he played okay today, don't get me wrong. 23 of 34, 212 yards and a touchdown. It's fine. He didn't fumble the football. He did a really good job with Evan Ingram at times. He got Sterling Shepard involved, and even Austin Mack had a nice day, 4 for 72. And this is a 2-7 football team. Surprisingly enough, they're still in the mix on this thing, regardless of what happens. I mean, the Cowboys, they should lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're up right now 16-9 with still a quarter and a half to go in this game. But I look at this and I just say the New York Giants need to find a way to move on from Daniel Jones. And it's not going to happen realistically. It's not going to happen simply for the fact that Dave Gettleman, his job is dependent on Daniel Jones succeeding and being successful. So with that, they're going to have to find ways to build around him in this offseason and in this draft. And I don't know how they're going to do that. Right now, they have an estimated $8 million of cap space. We'll see what they do. You've got to re-sign a guy like, Leonard Williams. Will you bring him back? Delvin Tomlinson, will you bring him back? You're going to lose one of your better defensive linemen. I don't know which one it's going to be. Tomlinson is a captain. He's a vocal leader. He's respected in the locker room. Leonard Williams, this is his second team in his career, both being the Jets and the Giants. So you'll see there. But right now, it looks like there's a chance that the New York Giants could very well, with the way that they're playing and with how their schedule looks the rest of the way, they got the Eagles, the Bengals, the Seahawks, the Cardinals, the Browns, the Ravens, and the Cowboys. Realistically, yeah, they might be able to win 3 of those games. Could they beat the Eagles? Yeah, I think so. Could they beat the Bengals? Yeah, I think so. Could they somehow squeak out a win against the Browns or the Cowboys? Yeah, I think that they could. They're not going to beat the Seahawks. They're not going to beat the Cardinals. And they're not going to beat the Ravens. You're talking about a 10-loss football team. They very well could be in the mix for a top 5 pick. And if they are, if it were me running this thing, I'm going all in on Justin Fields because I think realistically you're not going to get Trevor Lawrence. If they had the first pick, sure, Trevor Lawrence all day. I don't think anybody in the Giants organization would think twice if Dave Gettleman pulled the trigger on Trevor Lawrence. But the way Joe Judge has his team playing, the way that he's got this team fighting and battling every single week with this defense, it says something about him as a coach. It says something about this team and how they want to play for him, I think. But I think the missing factor is quarterback. We all know how crucial it is to have a good quarterback in this league. And, Daniel Jones can complete almost 62% of his passes all day long. I don't care about that. 23 years old, don't care about that. You got to start winning football games. And I think the right guy for the job would be Justin Fields. So here on Scenario Sunday, I would say the Giants should go after Justin Fields. Realistically, I know that's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen. So Giants fans, that leaves me with the question of what do they do? Who do they build around? And how do they do it? If it's not Justin Fields, if it's not Trey Lance, if it's not Zach Wilson, who's been buzzing in draft circles from BYU, the quarterback, if it's Daniel Jones and you're going to build around him, because again, Gettleman's job's dependent on it, who's a guy that you can take? No matter where they are in the draft of who they're going to potentially take in the draft, as of right now being projected with the 3rd overall pick, if you're not taking a quarterback, who is it? Is it Jamar Chase out of LSU? I certainly think that would be the right selection if we're talking about building Daniel Jones and building around him. You got to get him a true number 1 receiver. I don't think Sterling Shepard is a number 1. I don't think Evan Ingram is somebody to be reliant on saying, oh, this guy can be our pass-catching weapon. He's been leading the league in drops for tight ends over the last 2 seasons. So Jamar Chase makes the most sense, but 3 is pretty rich. Could they trade back? Are they in a spot where a team would want a quarterback? Washington. And again, this is all going to change because of how the season has gone now with Washington, losing another game, and I think with Washington, their quarterback situation, they're going to probably be more of a top 3 team. But it's just crazy. The NFC East is this bad that you have the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Washington football team at 3, 4, and 5 on the most recent draft order by Tankathon.com. So if it's trading back, is there a candidate to move up for a quarterback? Yeah, New England. I mean, you could make that case. Is Cam Newton the guy? Maybe not. He's only on a 1-year deal. So do the Giants move from 3 to 8? And, does Joe Judge get on the phone and say, hey, guys, former organization I worked with, here, take a pick and take some picks, give us some picks. Let's swap some things out. We'll move down to 8, take our guy, and you take your guy at the quarterback spot. Is that something that they do? Maybe, maybe not. Does anybody want to see Bill Belichick with another quarterback that he could potentially win championships with? I don't know. But that's an option. I mean, trading back, always an option, right? But it's Dave Gettleman. The guy doesn't move. The guy he doesn't do it. It's a rarity. He doesn't do it. So get familiar with players between probably 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. And if that's the case, I mean, I think Jamar Chase is certainly near the top of the list for Giants fans out there. Wide receiver, LSU, again, 6 foot, 208. He had 84 receptions and almost 1,800 yards with 20 touchdowns 2 seasons ago. Not this season, but last season. And, he opted out this year due to COVID, and it makes sense. But he's a player that I think gives you that true number 1 ability because he is a routine route runner that just makes it look easy. He's exceptional at tracking the football, and I like the decisiveness that he brings as a route runner and how he can attack not just vertically down the field, but how he can get open in the middle of the field. You can utilize him, whether it's running dig routes, slant routes. You can utilize him in so many different ways. So Jamar Chase with Daniel Jones would be an ideal, really 1-2 punch for your offense. And if you get a healthy Saquon Barkley back with some of the other pieces, I think that makes the most sense. Is it a little rich for some people? Maybe, but I think it makes a lot of sense. The other option, and I would just love to see it, Micah Parsons. Again, I'm sorry, Giants fans, I'm giving you 2 players that have opted out here outside of a quarterback and Justin Fields, but Micah Parsons out of Penn State. I think that makes a ton of sense with what he brings defensively. We talk about this defense really doing a great job playing for Joe Judge, wanting to play for Joe Judge and what they're doing in recent weeks. I mean, again, you look at what they've done in their recent games. They only allowed 20 points today. The Bucs, they allowed 25. Yeah, they lost, but still. The Eagles, they only allowed 22, and then 19 to Washington the week before. So they're starting to figure it out a little bit defensively. But Parsons would be a chess piece that would, I think, become kind of that alpha, that the difference maker on a defense that I think needs a difference maker. Parsons, with his ability to rush the passer, he had 5 sacks last year, 14 tackles for loss. And don't get up in arms about the sack numbers. He's not necessarily a defensive end. He used to play it in high school. He's around 250 pounds right now. I think it's where he wants to play. And I think, most importantly, you have to look at the amount of times that he is getting pressure on the quarterback, and Parsons is going to do that. And when you have a division that has Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott and whatever Washington throws out there at quarterback, you have to consider having that alpha. And even when it's not those teams that you're playing in your division, you talk about Seattle with Russell Wilson. You look down at Carolina with Teddy Bridgewater. You look at if Drew Brees plays next year, maybe, maybe not. Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, a division that is filtered and littered with so many different quarterback options across the NFC. So it's important to do that. And then, you could jump into the AFC stuff. You could look at Justin Herbert, a young kid, Joe Burrow, a young rookie, these 2 guys showing a lot of promise. And then you get a player like Patrick Mahomes, right? So I think those would be the 2 other options here on Scenario Sunday for Giants fans to get familiar with. Micah Parsons, the linebacker out of Penn State, and then, of course, Jamar Chase. But again, I stand true to this. I don't think Daniel Jones is the guy. And if the Giants have learned anything, don't be stubborn in changing a mess up before. You should have never taken Daniel Jones 6th overall. You shouldn't have done it. So it's okay to admit that was a mistake. Just look across the street. Look at the Jets. They're not building around Sam Darnold. And they're not doing it the right way. So if that's the case, go out and get the right guy. Go get a guy that can rejuvenate your offense. And you look at Herbert and what he's doing for the Chargers. You look at what Burrow's doing for the Bengals. Get yourself a guy that can do that. And I think that you can do that in this draft, whether it be a Zach Wilson or a Justin Fields. I don't think it's a bad thing if you're sitting there at 3 or 4 and you take that quarterback. You need that quarterback, and I think that's huge. And again, when you look at other games in this season, when you had the Cowboys 37-34, you had an opportunity to win that game. You didn't do it. The Bears 17-13, you had an opportunity. You didn't do it. The Rams, you had an opportunity. You didn't do it. Why didn't you do it? Because Daniel Jones wasn't throwing touchdowns in those games. From weeks 2 through 5, he didn't throw a touchdown pass. That's 4 games in a row with no touchdown passes. He had 3 interceptions and 3 fumbles lost. 0 touchdowns to 6 turnovers. You just can't have that. You can't have it when you're losing games by 1 score. So it's really time for Daniel Jones to take the right step. Dave Gettleman's got to put his job on the line. It all makes sense. But if it were me, Giants fan, I would be going after the quarterback. I'd admit my mistake, and I would do it. I would learn from the mistakes that are happening in the Jets organization, not doing it the right way around Sam Darnold, and I could very well see the same thing happen to Daniel Jones because Dave Gettleman is not doing this thing the right way. I don't think so. I don't trust him. But does another offensive lineman become a bad pick for them? No, I don't think so. I liked Andrew Thomas. He's just not working out exactly the way I thought he would. So I'm not necessarily saying it's all bad from Dave Gettleman, but I just don't trust him in the long term, in the long haul for Daniel Jones. So it'll be interesting to see. I would love to see what Giants fans think about, this episode of the podcast, what you think, most importantly, about your franchise, of Daniel Jones, and what direction this team should go when we get into draft talk for the 2021 NFL Draft. So this is Scenario Sunday. I want you guys to find me on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. Again, search Cover 1 NFL Draft Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, you can find us. Just search us, download us, subscribe, rate, review, and I'd love to get your comments on it. So find me again on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft. This has been Scenario Sunday on the Cover 1 Draft Podcast. I'd love to get your thoughts. We'll talk next week on another edition of the show next Sunday. Until next time, this is Cover 1, the Draft Podcast.